3D beat-em-ups were quite rare during the 32-bit era. While, yes, they were preceded by some incredible games dating back to earlier games or console generations, at this stage, these type of games were starting to see a decline in terms of their popularity. But it still wouldn't stop developers from trying to at least get creative with their ideas, as there was still an audience for this type of game out there, even if it was very small. And in 1998, Legend was released for the PlayStation, which is a 3D beat-em-up, and also acts as a remake of a game that was originally released on the Super Nintendo console way back a few years prior. The game itself was developed by a crowd known as Toka, that would also have been responsible for creating the arcade racing games Burning Road and Explosive Racing. And while we had other beat-em-ups on the platform, at that point you had the likes of Fighting Force, among a few others. But Legend, unlike those other games, still stayed to the original gameplay style of 2D beat-em-ups. While everything was in 3D, the characters and the environments, but the game still played out from a 2D perspective, where you moved from left to right to get to the end of each stage while battling all of the enemies and bosses in between. So the game gives you access to 3 different characters, all with their own abilities, movesets and skill levels that you can use in order to take advantage of different situations. Some will be a little bit stronger than others, while some will be faster but won't be as strong, but they can move around a lot quicker. So there's a different dynamic there depending on your own playstyle. Straight away from the get-go, when you see this game in action, it would kind of put you in mind of Golden Axe a little bit, as it was based more of around that kind of medieval gothic type of period, where you fight against a lot of different types of enemies, both from humans, knights, to like monsters, humanoid, kind of like hogs or pigs. Even later on you end up fighting dinosaurs, so that will tell you the obscure mix of traits that are in the game. So it's a case of you get to a certain point and then the area that you're in is closed off and you have to defeat all of the waves of enemies within that area before you're allowed to move on. And during that point you will also gain item drops, either weapons or health drops, or even like treasure that you can use to increase your overall score. And you will need this especially later on, because yes, you can use your hand-to-hand combat abilities, but sometimes it's better just to use the weapons. Now there are different weapons depending on different scenarios. You have your long range weapons, short range weapons with daggers, you have long swords, you have like a really heavy sword that will restrict your movement and is very slow and sluggish to use, but it will deal extreme amounts of damage to your opponents. Whereas likes of daggers, you'll be able to move a lot faster but you'll do less damage, and the long sword is kind of like the mid-range weapon that will deal adequate damage but will be kind of the go-to weapon. But you also have other abilities with the likes of spells and even like crossbows and so forth that you can use for ranged attacks against your enemies. When you start off with the game, you can play it either a single player or you can play a co-op with your mates, which ideally that is the best way to play it, as it's very like other beat-em-ups that have been released in the past. And while it is fun to some degree, it can get a bit repetitive and it will later on get very, very frustrating, as the entry level of the game, once you get used to the controls, it can be a bit unfamiliar at first, but once you get an idea of how the game operates, the first few levels are pretty straightforward. But if you manage to get further into the game, that's when it will really start to test you, because you will end up facing against different enemy types and their movesets and patterns are very, very different, and especially even with the bosses. The problem that I found with this game, having known that over the years, was the cheapness of the AI, especially with the bosses. I kid you not, that some bosses in the game are ridiculous. Like, they use so many cheap moves and they just get you into a corner and they just keep using the same moves over and over and over and over and over again. Even some of the enemies do that, and you'll notice that more in the game. Yeah, I'm looking at you, bloody raptor. You will get stuck with certain enemy types that just go to town on you and you can't do anything. You just have to hope that you lose a life, and what ends up happening is the screen will flash and there'll be flames that'll burn around your character as they're spawning back into the screen, but that can also damage any surrounding enemies. In some cases that's the only damage you'll be able to do on your opponent, because especially later on they block everything and you can't do any damage on them at all, and they use so many cheap moves that they just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, and you will end up losing all your lives. I kid you not, even playing it co-op, It's very, very hard. I think from all the times I've played this game, myself and my brothers over the years, I think we only ever completed it once. And it was a slog to get through. It's just, the gameplay was fine until a certain point, but it was just certain bosses and certain elements just would drive you crazy, because it was just the same cheap moves being used over and over and over again. And we're playing this here, I managed to get towards the last level of the game, but I also had the same issue on the last level, especially with the raptor. It just got you into a corner and it just kept doing the same move over and over again. As soon as you'd be knocked down on the ground, by the time you were getting up, it was hitting you already and you couldn't move. So I ended up losing about 7 or 8 lives before I could even kill it, and that's what drove you crazy. So there is that element of frustration. I know I've kind of gone off on a rant here, but this game will drive you to that. Like, I do like it for what it does try to do. It's a basic beat 'em up really in all respects to it. It doesn't try to be something it's not, but it just could have been better with regards to the computer AI, as all of the cheap moves will just drive you crazy, and that will worsen the experience for you if you're playing it. And many cases, no amount of skill can get you through that. It really just depends on absolute sheer luck to win those fights. But it is what it is. These games were never perfect. I don't think they were truly meant to be. I think back then when the game was released, even with these flaws, what you see is what you got. There was no way around it. You just had to play it and just hope for the best, really. That's all you could do. And this game is real proof of that. Now, it's not the best beat 'em up on the system, far from it actually, but it does offer something that will satisfy that craving for a while if you're looking for other games to play. There's no harm in trying this out as well. Some will like it, some won't. It will frustrate others while others will just enjoy it. But it really just depends on your own preferences really. But I'll leave that up to you. But if you have played Legend, I would love to know your thoughts of this game and what you think of it overall. Did you struggle with it like I did? And did you find certain parts of it just to be an absolute nightmare to deal with? Or what other types of beat 'em up games do you enjoy on the PlayStation? So be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you have enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel and hit that bell to be updated of future content. And if you would like to see more videos around other types of beat 'em ups that were also like this, that were released on the PlayStation, then check out the playlist on screen to see more of those games in action. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.